We're now going to have a panel discussion, and I think you're going to want to hear this one. It is also building on the theme of how we respond to the real challenges facing this sector right now, and we're going to dig deep into that with a panel. I'm going to invite them all onto the stage, and then I'm going to introduce you to them once they're on, but save your applause until they're all here and I've introduced them all. Otherwise, we'll be here all day clapping everybody individually. So can I please now ask to join me on the stage, Tassos Tsaniotis, Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, and Christina Bruce. If all three of you would join me, actually, I'm not going to sit right at the end. I'm going to sit here and have you three sit here. So if you all take your seats, I'd be very grateful. And I will now introduce you all. Christina, where are you? Do we have a Christina? I'm told she is with us somewhere.
She was in the speaker's lounge.
Ah, goodness. Somebody's going to have to sprint like Usain Bolt to the speaker's lounge. Well, well, this is fun. I'll introduce you to our, Christina. Yes, she's
There
racing.
she is.
Yay. She gets a special round of applause. Yeah.
Here.
Good. Well, we'll start with you, Christina. Thank you very much for joining us. So Christina is Senior Vice President for Sustainability and Social Impact at Anglo American, the huge sort of mining minerals corporation. Very great to have you with us, Christina. Thanks for joining us. Here we have Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, who is Global Ambassador for the Club of Rome and Executive Chair of the NGO Earth for All, an advisor and non-exec director with expertise in sustainability and energy transition issues. Sandrine, it's great to see you.
Thank you.
And in the middle of the panel, we have a figure who I suspect is familiar to many of you who are Brussels-based, Tassos Tsaniotis, Special Advisor for Sustainable Productivity issues here at the Forum for the Future of Agriculture, and a former very senior official in the Directorate General for Agriculture in the Commission. So please give a very warm welcome to all three of them. Now, our broad theme, building on the sort of subject matter that we've established from the very beginning of the forum today, is that we're living in pretty tough times and deeply uncertain times, and times that reek of a massive disruption to the way things have been done in all sorts of different sort of spheres of the economy, but certainly it impacts food and agriculture in a very real way. The broad title that people put on this talk was "The End of the World as We," very cheerful, "The End of the World as We Know It. What are the consequences for agriculture and the environment?" So I think we are mindful of the geopolitics, but we're also mindful of global economics. And we're certainly particularly mindful of all the issues that Michael Wirtz talked about in terms of food security and lack of food security in many parts of the world. So I'm going to invite each of you in turn just to reflect on this broad idea that the world as we know it has come to some sort of an end, and we have to think in different ways about the future. So Christina, I'll ask you to kick off with some opening thoughts, and then we'll get everybody in the panel going. You start.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and apologies that I made some people panic.
Shush.
It's just to keep everyone on their toes. So, the end of the world as we know it. It's an interesting one, I think, because we've often talked about the end of the world as we know it. Yes, we're living through immense volatility over the past few days, weeks, and months. But I think we've also already heard today that several of us in the sustainability space would say that we've been facing the end of the world as we know it for quite some time now from a climate perspective. And so I think both factors underscore the reality of our dependence on fossil fuels and the geopolitics that surround those fossil fuels and what it is that that means for our way of life. But what does it mean for agriculture, Anglo-American, and why am I sitting here today? Mining is a long-term industry. On average, it takes 17 years to develop a project from discovery to production. So picking carefully the what and the how we mine over the long term is critically important for our success. Governments play a key role in the regulation in terms of how we develop those mines. So from a strategic foresight perspective, access to market, what we mine, how we mine. From a portfolio perspective, we're responding to global population increase, the increased food insecurity that you mentioned, and a global soil health crisis to develop the world's largest deposit of polyhalite based in northern England. We will use the mine to develop innovative, efficient, low carbon fertilizer products that will provide farmers with access to calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sulfur, increasing yield, increasing quality of harvest, whilst also helping farmers improve nitrogen use efficiency, have access to naturally occurring sulfur, and to improve soil health. So that is us as a company responding to the global trends that we see around us and shifting our portfolio choices over the long term. It's an innovative set of products from a naturally occurring mineral that will increase, as I said, the yield and the quality of harvest. But to successfully do this...
Can I stop you for a sec, Christina? Because as I hear interesting things, I do want to pick away at them a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
When you say you're shifting, that implies you're shifting away from something. So what are you shifting away from?
So we divested from thermal coal several years ago, and we are in a complex process of changing our portfolio in order to focus on the value proposition of copper, iron ore, and polyhalite as we position our business for the future. We're also going through a merger, and our portfolio is growing there, but that will take me away from agriculture. But the global trends that are driving some of the conversation today and why we're sitting here today are absolutely key to how we see our value proposition as a company. I think looking at the people in the room, what are we calling for? We're calling for a focus on an ability to support innovation, support companies that are looking over the long term, by working together with customers, by working together with regulators to focus on systems resilience and sustainability over the long term.
Great. Well, that's fascinating and interesting to hear that Anglo-American very much sees this space as a space they can move into and have significant impact in. So thank you very much for that. Sandrine, I'm going to invite you to just give us your opening thoughts next. And if you don't mind, also just explain to me exactly what the Club of Rome is, because I'm aware that it's some sort of international gathering of the great and the good and involves all sorts of diplomacy and meetings. But what exactly is the Club of Rome?
Well, I don't know if we could all say that we're a gathering of the great and the good. We do try to approach this with a bit of humility, but thank you. And Janusz is actually also a member of the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome was started in 1968, actually, by an Italian businessman who, through his travels, started to realize that we were truly coming up to what he was calling at those days the limits to growth, hence why he commissioned the seminal work in 1972, which was undertaken by some chief modelers and scientists at MIT. The Club of Rome has since then continued to talk about the limits to growth, and hence why I would say my opening remark actually to the question of where we are is, well, we've been here before, exactly as Christina indicated. This is nothing new. Not only has the Club of Rome for the last 50 years been talking about the fact that we have limits, that we should actually adopt systemic approaches to the complexity of what we call the problématique humaine, but in addition to that, we've seen countless scientists who have indicated to us that we do have an interrelationship between population growth, the way in which people actually use resources, et cetera, et cetera. So I think my main point here today is to point to the fact that we have been here before, not only talked about these issues for the last 50 years, but even just in the last 10 years. We had a huge wake-up call during COVID. We had then another wake-up call during the Ukrainian invasion, where myself and actually co-members of the Energy Transition Commission brought forward systemic solutions to the European Commission at the highest of levels to talk about the relationship between minerals, food, and energy. We brought forward all types of different solutions: diversify, invest more in renewable energy, address energy efficiency, address your value chain, look at actually your dependencies, and try to bring in more resilience. Now, clearly, the geopolitics are such that we are seeing a plethora of knee-jerk reactions, very short-term reactions, both in the area of defense, which of course we understand, but two, I would say the risk of not thinking in long term, which is exactly what was just said by Michael.
But if I may, I mean, you say, you know, we've been here before and nothing much has really changed. Surely what's changed is that, and it's not just about Donald Trump, but there is a mood in many parts of the world that is much more transactional than it has been in a generation. There is a much more sort of out there, open notion in many different political spheres that, you know, let's not get hung up on all this talk of collaboration and cooperation and multilateral solutions to big global challenges. Let us just focus on our national interest and primarily our national economic interest. That is a prevailing mood right now. It goes far beyond Donald Trump, and that makes all of your messaging much more difficult, doesn't it?
National interest for whom and for what? That's the key response. What we believe and other economists believe is we've got an over-financialized economic system, absolutely transactional, fundamentally based on rentierism, that is not caring about actually ensuring the proper distribution of wealth. Now, what does that do? When you're in the midst of compound effects with more conflict, you've got climate change, which is continuously making the most vulnerable even more vulnerable, but in addition, actually is going to make it more and more difficult to grow food. And in addition to that, you've just come out of a pandemic. We now see that those compound effects are actually also having an increasing impact on growing inequality, a first generation that is actually making less than its parents, urban versus rural communities are completely disenfranchised, and in addition to that, the growth of populism because we have more and more discontent. What do you do in those types of situations? You actually hunker down and start to think through what are the systemic solutions, the holistic solutions that you can put in place. You don't just shoot a bunch of bullets and see who's going to die and who's going to win. And this is game theory that unfortunately is being passed on us from the United States, which sadly is what we're entering into.
Right, but I guess my point was that the messaging coming from, you know, multilateral, cooperation-friendly organizations like the Club of Rome isn't the messaging which is prevailing in the world right now. So I'm just wondering whether you feel a sense of deep frustration bordering on hopelessness, that the world isn't kind of listening to the messaging that you're putting out there.
Well, I do think that the Hungarian election has just given me a glimmer more of hope, but let's see what happens there. It's a very good question. And you know, with Christiana Figueres and others, we've always talked about vacillating between hope and despair. I'd like to give a new definition to hope, by the way. Hope is when you get down on your knees, you don't just pray, you actually get back up. You've got grit, you've got real power, and you're continuing to fight for something. I actually think we're in the middle of a series of deep tipping points, both social and environmental, which might actually, sadly, finally be the wake-up call. So in the sense that we've seen this before and leaders have not actually read the signs or the tea leaves, having just come back from China, and I look at the long-term plan of Xi Jinping, and there are lots of flaws, but at least on food and energy, they understand that this is the underbelly of their economy, in particular linked to poverty and inequality. I think now it is time for Europe in particular to think through, okay, how do we address land use in general? How do we understand the linkages between shifting and transitioning our energy system at the same time as our food system? What we're doing now is we're protecting an old system. We're not actually innovating. When you look at the difference with China, it's all about innovation. What are we doing here? We're getting caught up in actually supporting incumbents and hoping that for the moment, that Band-Aid approach will get us through. But we're not building a plan of resilience. We're moving backwards rather than forwards. And I think that is the sad truth of where we are. We have to have real conversations with the farmers that actually support the farming communities, but not just the farming communities, actually invest in rural communities. This means working with our banks, with our financiers, and look at short-term loans. And by the way, we have to think about fisher folk as well, not just tilling the land. So there are a variety of ways. We have to open up a totally new conversation with Africa as well. And look at Africa as our deep partner in the area of food production, as we know that 40% of our food is actually produced outside of Europe. And my final point would be this, that we really need to think through how we continue with a Green Deal, which is a green and social deal. Because with AI, although we're being promised all kinds of beds of roses, we know very well that they only create more acute impacts in terms of water use and energy use, and we need to think of an integrated approach in terms of the twin transition that was promised to us, looking towards green and social digital alongside a Green Deal that takes into consideration climatic impacts.
All right. Well, terrific stuff. Thank you. That was a great, great opener. Tassos, Sandrine was sort of looking at you quite pointedly at points there where she was talking about what Europe needs to do and getting away from just defending the way things are and have always been and thinking radical thoughts about restructuring and systematic change. You, for a long time, were a key player in the DG Agriculture in the Commission. Were you too busy defending the status quo and not thinking radical thoughts about change and the future?
Well, I would argue that there was a little bit of both. First of all, I was involved a lot in the reform of 2003. I wouldn't call the reform of 2003 just moving along the previous system. It was a real break where we saw the positive effects for years.
What was the deep significance of 2003?
The deep significance of 2003 is to start with a point where you realize that farmers are entrepreneurs that can take their own decisions about what to produce, and you need to focus on how they produce. And the result has been a reversal in a downward trend in farm income, an impressive growth in the agricultural trade balance, and actually something that we tend to underestimate, the fact that European agriculture is the only major agriculture in the world that has reduced emissions. So we must have done something well. Not perfect, but something has worked. But at the same time, especially the last 10, 15 years, we saw that we needed to start focusing better on integrating the environmental dimension in what we're doing. And I mean, one of my frustrations while I was still in DG Agri, and especially now outside, is that, I mean, one of the things that has changed is that we used to rely much more on analysis than what the Commission does today. So we gave our political masters the possibility to choose among different options based on analysis. That was independence. Now, the Commission makes proposals and there is no impact assessment.
Yeah.
I think one has to keep in mind at the same time what has happened in terms of the policy debate and what the farmers are doing. Let's take what has changed in the present world, because there are things that have been like they have always been. Others are at the borderline between what is political science and child psychology, so I'll leave it for another science. But when it comes to agriculture, what has really changed is we used to have a very long-term downward trend in real agricultural prices. We're talking about 150 years downward trend. In this century, this has reversed. Agricultural prices in real terms at the global level are going up. But at the same time, energy prices, fertilizer prices are going up much more.
More so now than ever.
Yes, and food inflation actually has come into the picture. Now, if a farmer today has to take a decision about what they do in this context, what they do, they purchase fertilizer and they have an economic act with a cost and an expected profit. But at the same time, they engage in an environmental act. Whether they put too much, too little, or the right amount in the soil will have an environmental impact. Now, farmers are doing this jointly. There is no distinction between the economic and the environmental activity. At the policy debate, we have the economic discussion here and the environmental discussion there. And we have never tried to put together in concrete policy terms what this means. You mentioned, both of you, soil and land management. Now, I asked this question even yesterday in the sponsors of the forum, you have private companies, whether it's on machinery, whether it is on fertilizer, whether it's on crop protection. They generate in their activities an enormous amount of data that we never had before. Now, is there a way that we have a public platform, the Joint Research Center of the Commission has the capacity to do that, where we bring this data in a manner that protects the privacy of the individual farmer, regionalizes where soil characteristics are the same, and tells us in policy terms what we have to do. We know things are going to get worse before they get better. We know that in soil health, it takes time to make an improvement. And we have to find and look for an EU common denominator of what we want to do. You know, when we keep saying that one size doesn't fit all, we rediscover America. We know that. We always knew that. The thing is, if it doesn't fit all, what is going to be the specific policy instrument that is more pertinent in these soil characteristics than in other soil characteristics? How does this link to the discussion we're having about climate change? We keep talking about carbon taxes, carbon prices. Why should there be one carbon price? Well, the capacity of soil to absorb carbon is very different. And it depends on the practice you have, it depends on the natural characteristics. This debate is something that we don't have anymore. And that's where I think we're missing an opportunity, because there are three major changes that are taking place in this new world. First of all, trade is considered something completely different than what we had. It was never perfect, at least we had a framework that we knew within which limits we had to work in. Second, I personally think that one of the biggest successes of the Commission of all times has been the Paris Agreement on climate change. What we did afterwards is we started increasing ambition to such a level that became totally realistic. Now we've gone to the other extreme, and we don't dare to even mention that we need to do the things that we said up until. And I'm not saying that we should change direction, but there are things and adjustments that we have to make in the policy orientation. And the third thing that, in my view, is extremely important is science. When you have a discussion right now about the vaccination of children, we lost a generation of scientists and a generation of citizens that took, in another generation, certain things for granted, and they're not doing it anymore. So if on basic things of science, we cannot agree, how in the world are we going to agree about what we're going to do in a better balance between mitigation and adaptation of climate change? And to come up with a positive note, I think in Europe, we do have the capacity to lead in these areas, but we have the tendency of self-flagellation. Take a look at the Draghi report on competitiveness. Where is the agri-food sector? One of the first sectors that has used satellite imagery for Earth observation. One of the most sophisticated sectors in terms of food safety and technology. One of the sectors that has reduced emissions, unlike all the others, and one of the sectors that is actually exporting agricultural machinery because it's much sophisticated. So if we take this out, how do we expect to improve things if on the things that we're doing well, we are ashamed to even discuss them?
All right. Well, look, that's also a great, you've raised lots of questions in my mind already, Tassos, but I'm not going to, and I know you want to come back, Sandrine, so hold the thought that you had in your head. I just want to introduce a fourth member of our panel. I didn't introduce her earlier because we didn't know we were going to be able to get her, but I hope Mariangela Hungria in Brazil. Can you hear me, Mariangela?
Yes, perfectly.
And tell us, where are you exactly?
I'm in Londrina, state of Paraná, Brazil, and I'm sorry to be late, but I just arrived from a trip. I traveled the whole night, and then I was taking a shower, before going to the meeting.
You know what? You're looking terrific. So the shower clearly did you a lot of good. You're looking super fresh. Thank you for joining us. It's great, and honestly, we've got great video link so we can see you, and that's fantastic. Let me just introduce you to our audience here Mariangela, because we've got 200 or 300 people in our auditorium and other people watching online. So I'm delighted to say, everybody, that Mariangela Hungria is the World Food Prize laureate for 2025 from Brazil. And she's done extraordinarily important work in soil health, in biological means for fixing nitrogen in soils, which has led to soil health transformation, of course represents some sort of sustainable alternative to synthetic fertilizers. And for that work, as I say, she is the World Food Prize laureate 2025. And Mariangela, we've got a big theme here, which we want you to give us some thoughts on, which is, are we living through a watershed moment? Is it, and the panel have suggested this, is it just another time where we're talking about the end of the world as we know it, or is it different now? Are the rules changing? Are we going to have to think radical thoughts about the future, which we've not really addressed in the past? And in particular, in terms of agriculture and the environment, do you see us living through a moment of profound transformation?
Well, look, many times in history, we passed through this challenge. And by the end of the 1960s, we had the Green Revolution because the world, Norman Borlaug received the prize because the world was facing lack of food, okay, because the population was growing exponentially, and then but the food was not. And then Norman Borlaug, by breeding and chemical fertilizers mainly, he did this green revolution. The world realized that was not going to starve. And we had a great increase in food production, including Brazil. Okay, when I was a child, we imported food, and today we are amongst probably the second place today in exporting food. But the world changes and we are changing. So I'm gonna talk only about one aspect that's my main subject of work. If we had the Green Revolution in the 70s, today we should have a micro-green revolution. That's a revolution in agriculture, but using biologicals. What happens? We use lots of chemicals like fertilizers to produce food for the world. We need fertilizers, but they are limited. We have problems of transportation, including Brazil. We import 85% of the chemical fertilizers that we use. And so we have to take advantage of science that has shown to us that many microorganisms can replace partially or fully the chemical fertilizers. Okay, and the world is not taking advantage of that. Even Brazil, that has today the leadership in the use of biologicals in agriculture, and I'm talking about fertilizers because I work with fertilizers, but also with biological pesticides are very important. So searching the biodiversity of each country, microorganisms or macroorganisms that can help to replace chemical fertilizers, to replace chemical molecules that are used as fungicides, insecticides. We can also have they are much cheaper. They can be environmentally friendly, and also they can have less chemical residues, so the food would be healthier. They improve soil health. So we have to take advantage of this in this new microgreen revolution. For you to just...
If I may, Mariangela, let me interrupt you just for a second, because what you're working on is so interesting and so potentially very important in global food production. But if you want to see this transition to biological methods rather than chemical methods, are you at some point accepting a loss of yield, a loss of output of some sort? Or in your view, can it be achieved by still boosting yields and outputs, which is what the world needs because the world is still facing food shortage, in some parts of the world at least?
Well, this food shortage is very important to note. It's not really because of lack of production.
Sure.
There are other problems of distribution and everything. And you know, that was something that I have learned. And I believe that that's why they gave me the World Food Prize. I still do not believe that I deserve it. But anyway, I realized that I could never reach a farm and say, look, you are going to take care of the planet, you are going to improve soil health, but you have to contribute producing less and decreasing your profit. That's impossible for farmers, at least farmers in Brazil, but I believe that farmers all over the world. So we have to do lots of research and to put science, because indeed it's possible. And I can give you the example of soybean in Brazil. We are today the first producer and exporters of soybean, and the crop relies on, regarding nitrogen, relies only on biological nitrogen fixation, but it's not something of 2-3 years. Okay, we are working on that for 40 years, searching the best strains, doing plant breeding in the presence of microorganisms. So we have to change our view. Okay, so breeding is not with chemical, plant breeding. We have to put the biologicals there. And just to finish giving one example, just for the soybean in Brazil, by saving nitrogen fertilizers and replacing by microorganisms, in the last crop season, we saved $26 billion. And as important as this one, we did not release to the environment 260 million tons of CO2 equivalents. Okay, so this extreme, and we have other technologies that for carbon sequestration, for decreasing the emission of greenhouse gases, such as recovery of degraded pasture, as the no-tillage, and so on. So we have to change our view for this new world that we want, an agriculture that has less impact in the release of greenhouse gases.
That's really interesting, and I thank you so much for telling us all about that. And frankly, this morning we've had quite a lot of fairly gloomy analysis of where we are, and you've just given us something really quite positive. So thank you very much. I'll come back to you very soon, Mariangela, but I've got my panel here with me as well. If anybody wants to react to what you've just heard, that's terrific. And then I've got a couple of questions in my mind, and then we're going to get to audience questions. But I can see you've got fingers pointing. So actually, Sandrine, you had something earlier you want to say, and then I'll come to you, Christina.
Yeah, and I just wanted to build on both, actually.
Yeah.
First of all, I so appreciate what Tassos brought to the table. The first is the respect and the understanding of science and innovation. And absolutely, one of those links between the digital and the green transition is satellite technology, optimized technology that's really going to help farmers. But I really think it's important, with what we've just heard from Mariangela, is just how much science there's out there that is bringing us opportunities that we're not seizing. And also the conversation. When I was in Belém, working with the Brazilian government, the amount of areas that we actually could join up together, both in terms of agricultural processes and production methods, but also how we were looking at forests, the use of the land in terms of forestry, the use of the land in terms of fiber, the use of the land in terms of food. And I think this comes back to this point of why are we not seizing these opportunities, both of the academics that are across the globe that are bringing forward alongside also innovative companies, and really using this as the moment to totally shift, because we have the solutions.
Do you think Europe is particularly bad at encouraging and embracing speedy R&D and innovation, or do you think it still is an environment where regulation, oversight, and a deep caution, and the fact that so many different nation states have a say in the overall sort of framing of the regulatory environment. Do you think it's very difficult in Europe compared, for example, with Brazil or North America or China?
So I think there are two things. One is that the corollary to the Draghi report is obviously the Letta report. And Letta is very clear about the fifth freedom. He's very clear about the fact that we built Europe on the foundation of science. So what has happened? The problem is that we do not have a real fifth freedom around research that goes between member states. Member states are not working hand in glove in the way that they should.
Right.
I think Europe could be better. Now, coming to simplification versus regulation, which is part of your loaded question, do I feel that we should deregulate? Absolutely not. I think we should regulate better. Better regulation is what we need. We need sound regulation. But we do need to evolve in being much more flexible, much more agile when it comes to innovation, ensuring that we ensure support for companies that are moving in the right direction. But we do also, exactly as Tasso said, need to make sure we still have impact assessments. I mean, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is exactly what we're doing now when we look at the series of omnibus discussions and the way in which we're weakening our regulation. We need strong frameworks.
You're worried about what you see as the direction of travel right now.
Absolutely. Excuse me, but I'm also worried that we're now preaching the Bible in the European Parliament rather than bringing in real data sets. We've got a problem here. What's happening in the United States, and I speak with an American voice, but I'm actually French-Belgian, is starting to encroach here. So let's be very careful that we don't lose the sound European foundation of values as well as science in the way in which we move forward and make our decisions.
Right, but the danger is if you stick to that, and I totally understand it's values driven, but you can arguably get left behind.
Well, we didn't get left behind. And by the way, if we're left behind now, it's not because of what's just happening now.
We are sort of left behind in certain sectors. We're nowhere near the lead in lots of different technologies, AI, you know, compared with the United States. So maybe we're going to get left behind in food and ag research as well if we're not careful.
I think there's also a point of, and there is a restructuring of understanding. If we're going to protect the single market, we are going to have to think about some mechanisms that truly do protect it. Think about the fact that 80% of our data is in the hands of the United States. In some ways, did we not put enough into our own companies, or did we just allow ourselves to get bought out? And I think that's a key question that we're also not asking. 30% of our banks are owned by the United States. So we've enabled penetration into the market. And I think there we've got a bit of a sovereignty issue, to say the least. The question is, how do you deal with it?
I'm finding all this fascinating. We are in danger, I guess, of roving into territory that goes a bit beyond our remit. So I'm going to rein you in at that point, but great stuff. And Christina, I know you wanted to contribute too, so go ahead.
Thank you. Tassos made some powerful hand movements by talking about economic prosperity and environment and how we really need to bring them together. And I think, Stephen, you're encouraging us to not insist that this is just another blip and that we are facing a period of real change. So perhaps I'm going to add that certainly in my world, and I am the corporate sitting here very aware, there is a real change in how people in my space, in the sustainability space, are needing to articulate value in order to influence the behavior of companies and decision makers. And so we are facing a change. But I think what we have to do is to recognize what the long-term trends are and really hammer down in terms of what is that value? What is the value proposition of supporting the environment and of having long-term sustainable practices, of supporting the innovative solutions that we have? We have no magic bullet. There is not one solution. It's a bit like the renewable energy debate. The solution lies in multiple offerings. But we are having to really articulate value, I think, at the moment in a way that we perhaps didn't 2 years ago, 5 years ago. And and yes, I say that with a corporate lens, but I think it's also true of regulators. It speaks to a period of change that I think we are experiencing. Just to give your narrative of big change a bit of
no,
a
well, that's helpful. But when you,
support.
value is a sort of word that can mean lots of different things. So when you say we're having to really focus on value, what in practical terms does that actually mean?
For us, it means a successful business
And
over
bottom
the long
line,
term.
basically, it's all got to
but
be
in a-
about.
but in a way that creates meaningful value for the stakeholders upon which we depend. So it's recognizing that if we don't create value, the short-termism at the cost of destruction of trust and destruction of improvement of, say, the lives of the communities around our mines, will enable us to be successful over the very long term. So it's not just about the dollar, but yes, we have to be successful businesses, but it is about value for our stakeholders, and partnership, I think, is a key piece to that.
Tassos, yeah, Sandrine was saying very interesting things, which I did want to hear your view on, and I just, maybe I'm putting this very crudely, but can Europe afford to sort of stick to its guns in terms of the way it does things, in terms of the thoroughness of its regulatory environment, and its determination to stick to values, when the world, it is transactional right now, and it is a deeply competitive international economic environment. And if we see, Brazil doing things, or if we see the North Americans doing things, and the Chinese and the Asian market doing things, which seem to give them a lead over Europe, can Europe afford to ignore that?
No, we should, not only should not ignore it, but we should learn from it, but we should also learn from the things that we're doing bad and the things that we're doing good. First of all, I don't believe that when it comes to science, Europe doesn't count. On the contrary, it counts a lot. Where we don't count is in bringing together the results of all this scientific work that is taking place in a manner that is relevant to policy. And we're never going to do it if we continue doing what the last commission has been doing, which is abandoning the reliance on analysis. Whether you like or you don't like the result of analysis, that's a choice that you have as a politician.
So tell me how you think the commission has abandoned real analysis.
Let me give you an example with Brazil, because the Brazilian example is a perfect example of what relying on research, long-term research, is doing, and what Embrapa has done. Brazil grew its agriculture because it based it on science and the application of science. Now, one of the problems that our farmers have with Brazil, because the Mercosur agreement is about Brazil essentially, is the fear of the role of Brazil. If you don't explain to European farmers in the world that if you look at the global sphere, Southeast Asia and Africa will have increasing food deficits in the years to come. And Brazil is not going to be producing to export to Europe, especially with the type of tariff quotas that we have, but to the rest of the world, which is something that we have to do, then obviously, if you don't explain that to farmers and you don't base it on analysis, your farmers will never understand what is at stake, and they will always have a fear. Now, we did a lot of analysis about the Mercosur agreement. I first went to Brazil in 2004, in the beginning of these negotiations. There have been ups and downs, and to give you an example, again, 2004, I presented as a head of unit in Hong Kong in front of 70 people, 40 of which were agricultural councillors of other countries, 3 scenarios of WTO negotiations: the EU proposal, the American proposal, and the Brazilian G20 at the time proposal. In the public domain, did it hurt our position in terms of negotiations? On the contrary. It helped us because it shows that what we were proposing were based on analysis. Now, if you don't do any analysis anymore, whom are you going to convince? And that's the first problem we have. The second one, I mean, whether we like it or don't like it, we will never become the United States of Europe. The weight of history is enormous in this continent. And our national identities are our strengths and our weakness at the same time. And that would slow the process of decision making. But if it slows the process of decision making, let's see what we could do to make this process move better. And for me, the crucial element is to prioritize, to come up with EU common denominators. Yes, every member state has to decide what they want to do with their farming sector, with their structural adjustments. But when we talk about soil health, do we agree that there are 3 or 4 basic indicators that they should be the same, and we should do everything we can to improve them with a medium-term perspective? And if this is the case, and by the way, this is the case, and the information is out there, what do we have to do to use the policy that is already there to bring these things together? This discussion, this debate, unfortunately, doesn't take place anymore. And to give you an example, I asked a former colleague, can I participate? There was a call for experts, and the answer was no, because there is no space for individuals to participate. You have to be in a lobby. And if you're fine, but in the previous, we always had lobbies, but we also had a process where in the public consultation, you could have your individual contribution. We had in 2014, I think, around 60. And currently, with artificial intelligence, you can actually outline and analyze these individual contributions in a better way. That doesn't even exist. So what we have is something that you can read in the website of every organization.
Okay. Well, look, there's a lot
Well,
of food.
I want to
Yeah,
give
go on,
some
Mariangela. Yeah, go on.
contribution later. Yeah, yeah. Well, if I can contribute with something, just I think that a major problem is called profit. You know, that's what we face, and so we need innovation in the way that we consider the benefits in agriculture. I face this problem here in Brazil, and I'm sure that in Europe can be even worse. Why? Today, the news and the people, they just want to know about the billions of profits of IA and all many technologies have. And agriculture does not have that amount of profit. And so what the problem that we are facing? Like science does not sell things, does not make profit. Science needs private partners that will put the things in the market, that will take to the farmers. Unlike chemical, the industry of chemical inputs makes far more profit than the biological industry, and so we have lots of problems
Yeah,
because
actually,
they do
Mariangela,
not.
if I may, I want to just learn from you. Your research has been wonderful and has been acknowledged around the world as being very important. Who funded you?
Public research, Embrapa, okay? And so, you know, we face many times problems because they say, well, Embrapa does not make a profit. Of course, we do not sell anything, but we have like a social profit that we estimate and we show to the society. But like today, the private sector here, we are very successful with biologicals, but just for the great majority is for big farmers because it's easier and they make more profit. So we have hundreds of solutions for small farmers, and the solutions do not arrive at the small farmers because the profit is lower. So we have, who wants to invest in technologies that will improve soil health? No private company. So what we have to do is to find an innovation system of business, maybe with the participation of the governments, that will take lots of technologies that science knows, and science in Europe has wonderful results, but that do not reach the farmers because we do not, will not have profits of billions of
Yes.
dollars.
That's an excellent point and very well made. Thank you. Right, so Mariangela, you can't see, but I'm now going to open up the floor to our roving microphones and to you guys in the audience. You've been very patient listening to all this, and I promise you there's a coffee break coming up, so you're going to get refueled and you're going to get new energy. But prove to me that you still have energy. This is an opportunity to ask some big picture questions from a terrific panel. We've got a hand up over here, so we'll go to you first, sir, but other people too, do raise your hands and I will get to you, but we'll start with you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much for a very interesting panel. My name is Max Schulman, and I'm an arable farmer from Finland. The end of the world as we know it. Two things there. I just want to ask the panel, do you see that Europe, as the European Union, since we sit here in Brussels, have actually understood that the world is changing, that they most probably have understood, but also that you have to take action, sometimes even faster than what is the normal pace in here. Just one example, the situation in Middle East and fertilizers. Have we taken the right reaction to it?
Okay, who would like to take that first?
Take it
Yeah,
Maybe you,
yeah, I
Carlos?
think it's very simple. Yes, I think Europe understands not only now, but generally what is happening, but there is a fear of taking fast action because of the very difficult decision-making process, very complex that we have.
But is it also because I think you've alluded to already? I mean, Europe is made up of countries with very different perspectives and interests, so it's very hard to get urgent decisions out of Europe.
That will always be the case, unless you have already determined a mandate that says, for example, when something like that happens in fertilizer market, then automatically you have it in legislation. But the problem with the legislation is you start making a proposal in a certain price environment, and by the time that you arrive to take the decision, the price environment has changed.
This is why I think we need to put in place some kind of emergency plan, or at least some kind of emergency discussion around how do we become more agile when we're faced with these complex compound effects. And my response also is, what type of action? I mean, what is the action actually that most farmers really need, and what is it that they want? Is it around reducing the price of fertilizer? Is it also understanding that maybe now is the time to really push regenerative and other agricultural practices, which, by the way, the cost is lower now for organic food than it is for traditional food because those organic producers are not using fertilizer? Is this the type of moment where actually member states could start to create a real market for that shift? And then what kind of loans do we need to put in place to enable farmers to be able to shift? And what kind of phase-in, phase-out strategy do we need in terms of some types of fertilizers? I mean, I think the key question is, let's have a systemic approach to the fertilizer discussion, which, once again, as I said, we already proposed to the Commission when we had the first Ukrainian invasion that they needed to address the fertilizer crunch issue alongside the energy and the mineral issue at the same time. We are exactly in the same place, partly because, exactly as Tasso says, we're not having proper analysis, scenario development, or foresight, which should have been undertaken in order to start to build in the resilience in the system that we have today.
Mariangela, just from the perspective of Brazil, which of course is a superpower in terms of food production, does Europe look a little bit lost, a bit weak, a bit sort of incoherent?
Well, you know, unfortunately, we face the same problems. Like when we had the war of Ukraine and Russia, we delineated a wonderful plan of fertilizers in Brazil because we cannot import 85% of the fertilizers that we use. And that was great. Everybody liked it. The government signed, and it was there. Okay. So just now, because of the new war, then there is the revival of the discussion of the plan. I believe that the legislatures, they do not have a continuous agriculture. You can never stop, okay? Things have to be fast, and the decisions are long-term decisions. Also today, everything has to be fast, fast, fast. People have to understand that it's a continuous agriculture. Legislation is extremely important. Science has a long-term science because we have to prove in the field, and the crops take time. It's not just like this new generation that wants the things in 1 week. So it's a completely different thought, and we have to invest and to show to the society that agriculture, production of food, and mitigation of greenhouse gas, so that we'll have a better climate and a more stable production, takes time and has to have continuous action.
Okay, thank you. We've got time for a couple more. There's a hand up over there, so we'll try to get the microphone to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask this question. I represent the European Food Bank Federation. We've talked about a lot of things, production. Two things, availability and accessibility are not the same thing. We haven't talked about the millions of tons of food that are thrown yearly in Europe.
Yeah.
Only the Federation helps over 12 million people by recovering that food and redistributing that food. There are solutions and there are more positive elements that we can do collectively to do this. And one is to use our resources better. And I would like to hear from maybe the panelists how they see this point. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always important to remember this isn't just about maximizing production, it's also maximizing efficiency of distribution of what is produced. And are we making progress? You know, can we say that we get it in terms of focusing on that efficient distribution? I have to say, I just read a story yesterday about potatoes and potato mountains in Europe, and the fact that, you know, on Belgian farms, potato farmers are literally giving away their potatoes because their market value is pretty much zero, which suggests to me that, you know, the distribution system isn't really working at the moment. And are we learning lessons? Are we closer to getting it right?
Yes and no. Let's be clear. When it comes to primary agriculture, this is a textbook definition of a competitive market, because you have millions of farmers, and the price mechanisms there will tell them what they have to do 1 year on the other. The problem is that you have to wait a whole year to make the adjustment. When it comes upstream and downstream to the food chain, you have oligopolistic structures, and you don't have perfect price transmission, and that complicates things. And I'm not sure that the competition authorities are doing the job that they could do, especially because also there is a lack of information and data that would allow you to do that. Food inflation at the level it has been, it's not explained by what happened in primary agriculture. I mean, you just look at the graphs and the evolution, it's simply not explained. So there is plenty of scope for improvement there. And there have been efforts by the Commission to do something about that. Second thing, you're right about food waste, but I think my personal feeling is that food waste has been blown out of any proportion by the numbers that have been used, this 30% of food waste, without saying whether it's quantity, value, or what have you. It was never 30%. And as a result of that, setting unrealistic targets implies that if it's 15%, we already achieved our target. And that has actually limited the possibility to take concrete measures to reduce food waste where it needs to be done. And most of the food waste are in specific perishable products and at the final consumer level. So there is space. There is also space of redistributing. There is space to use it for fertilizer, but there are also limits on what we could do in other areas. For me, the biggest problem that we have is in terms of the efficiency in the input use. And that's where precision farming is not something that applies to conventional agriculture. You can do it on organic farming, you can do it in any type of farming, because it is what the name says. It is precision. and how we actually improve the use of the inputs that we have, even the current available inputs, is something that has a lot to do with the existence or the lack of functional farm advisory systems in the European Union. So the type of knowledge that is out there has to be transferred to farmers.
Sandrine?
Yeah, in the UN Food Systems Summit, when I was working as the chair of one of the working groups on resilience, what we saw, and also in the book Earth for All, one of our turnarounds where we've looked at system dynamic modeling, obviously waste from the agricultural system is a huge greenhouse gas emitter and a big problem. And so it is clear that the system is not optimized. But exactly as was just said by Tassos, it depends on where you are. In Africa, for example, it is a distributional problem and a refrigeration problem, and so we need to focus on that. In Europe, it's an overconsumption problem and overproduction problem, and therefore we need to focus on the actual waste. And what do we do with it? First of all, reduce the waste, but also we haven't looked enough at bioenergy uses, the possibilities of using that waste, and this is where regulation is not always our friend, because sometimes it is too complex and too difficult, and therefore we just throw away the waste rather than reusing it. So there needs to be much more smart acupuncture pressure in these different areas, especially when we're in a short-term system right now. So it's almost like we're building the plane and flying it at the same time. You've got to have the short-term levers. Some of these solutions we know. As I said, let's also focus on how can we start to transform the system now as we're in this crisis and really help some of the farmers that are trying to use the land in a very different way, as well as address the waste issue and redistribute what we can distribute because people are actually suffering and not having access to affordable food. These are things that we can do right away, as well as start to look at the pricing mechanisms, as Tassos says, are very complex and very difficult.
And you'd like to think that the crisis, if that's the word for what we're in right now, is a catalyst for making some of this change happen.
Absolutely, and to Mary Angela's point, I mean, I often talk about the 3 Ps, which is power, profit, and patriarchy. And apologies, but we do have a series of patriarchal systems right now. We've got an empire that's in free fall in the United States, otherwise known as tech-bro-feudalism, and it really is a patriarchal system, which is in free fall. So we should really stop looking at the US as an example. But to Mary Angela's point, you can shift from those 3 Ps to what I call people, planet, and prosperity. And this is to Christina's point, where do you put a value? There is a very well-documented and actually, I would say, conversation, but also discussion at the UN level, at the OECD level, through the JRC and here, where we're now placing a value on different types of capital. Natural capital, human capital, environmental capital, as well as obviously economic capital. And there is now going to be a new report next week, which will be released by the UN, by the high-level group, on moving beyond GDP. Because part of placing that value is now thinking through, are we only going to continue to focus on productivity and GDP, or are we going to broaden our indicator base to place a value on nature, to place a value on employment, to place a value on affordable health care, because that is not what we're doing right now in an over-financialized system.
All right. Terrific points, well made. The only comeback I've got on that is that at least there's no patriarchy on this panel, because you've got 3 women and 1 man, and I have to say that isn't always the case on panels like this.
Two men.
Oh, I don't count myself because I'm a neutral. I'm sexless.
Definitely count yourself.
All right, fair point, but you still win 3-2. Anyway, that's a very superficial and silly point. I wish I hadn't made it, but never mind.
No, it's important. You've made an important point.
Okay, good. Listen, we run out of time, and I suspect there are still questions on the floor, and that's my fault for being a rubbish chairman or chairperson. But I think at this point, ladies and gentlemen, you all deserve a coffee break. So before you go to your coffee and just to have a chat and a relax and then come back, because Rose has got another terrific session in about, I think, half an hour from now. Enjoy your coffee, but before you go, just give this terrific panel a very warm hand, and particularly Mary Angela, thank you very much.